Thank you for the food we're about to receive. In the Lord's name, amen.
A typical American family at dinner. Mom and Dad, their beautiful daughter-in-law, and their only son, Joe, a homicidal maniac.
Harry! What are you doing?
How's your dad? It's okay.
Here you go.
Thanks a lot.
What you hunting this time?
I'm gonna shoot some pigs.
I didn't realize it at the time, but I was setting myself up for easily one of the top 10 greatest film marathons of all time. Maybe even top 5. I must have been 22 or 23. It was post-COVID, let's just say that. And for whatever reason, I was in sort of a campy mood for something old but fun. Kind of an attitude. Kind of had that feeling going on. So for the first time, I started going through all the great Universal monster pictures. Boris Karloff's The Mummy, Boris Karloff's Frankenstein, Creature of the Black Lagoon, Dracula, The Wolfman, and my personal favorite of the whole set is The Invisible Man. Now, I really enjoyed these films, especially because after finishing each one, I would go down to the local Walmart superstore and purchase the NECA action figure to match the film I had watched that night. And if you haven't seen those particular NECA action figures, the box art is easily the best part of the whole thing. It's basically designed to replicate the original film posters. It's really, really well done work. And so, truth be told, this was my first time experiencing these films. I don't know why it took me 23 odd years to get to them. It just happened to work out that way. But my marathon didn't end with the Universal monsters. I thought it did at the time. I thought, The Invisible Man was sort of the last hoorah of the films I was willing to watch. I'm not going to bother myself with the, 50 odd Frankenstein and Dracula sequels that came after that. I'm not. I enjoyed the movies for what they were. The special effects still hold up, but it wasn't enough to get me to go through all of the sequels. It just didn't grip me that strongly. So I moved on, and the next film that I watched after this marathon would end up being sort of the secret bookend to this marathon that I had started. And I didn't even really mean for it to happen this way. It was just sort of a coincidence that my marathon of monster flicks ended with none other than Peter Bogdanovich's Targets from 1968, which, of course, stars Frankenstein's monster himself, a.k.a. The Mummy, a.k.a. Boris Karloff. This also marks Bogdanovich's feature debut, and if you know anything about me, you know I'm obsessed with feature debuts. Elaine May's Mikey and Nicky, Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs, Peter Hyam's Busting, Christopher Nolan's Memento, Michael Sarnowski's Pig, George Lucas's THX 1138, so on and so forth. There's something incredibly meta about Targets that makes it feel almost more like a documentary than a narrative film. And this film was made during a time when movies couldn't have a theatrical run without complying with what was called the Hays Code. It was a set of censorship rules that restricted what could be depicted in American cinema. So if you wanted your movie to be in theaters, you had to comply with the PCA and the Hays Code. That was sort of the standard of what was allowed in your film if it were to have a theatrical run. Now, not everybody had to comply. You didn't necessarily have to comply with the Hays Code. It's just if you wanted your movie to be played in theaters, you had to comply with the Hays Code. So various examples of what the Hays Code enforced was profanity, nudity, drug use, even something oddly specific. White slavery is on that list, funny enough. And, any sort of willful offense to any sort of nation, race, or creed. And frankly, it seems like modern day Hollywood has sort of developed an unwritten Hays Code. And like the rest of the world and most indie filmmakers, people are finding ways around it. But Targets was released in 1968, and that was actually the very year the Hays Code was lifted and replaced with age-based ratings that would eventually become what we recognize today. And this shift happened because people started to realize, these industry professionals, the executives started to realize that a film containing mature graphic material didn't necessarily mean they had an unsuccessful movie on their hands. In fact, it started to mean quite the opposite in the late 60s and even the late 50s, Some Like It Hot being a prime example of this shift. But people started to develop an appetite for gritty, sexually explicit action films where filmmakers weren't pulling their punches anymore. Like, you were seeing real and raw things happening on screen, and people were willing to pay top dollar for that sort of entertainment. They were getting tired of sort of the Hitchcockian censorship type of isms where it just wasn't scratching the itch for the younger audiences like it used to. So what you saw in the late 60s, what you saw was old Hollywood and new Hollywood colliding, essentially. And the question was, what were younger audiences, essentially the future of theater revenue, what were these younger audiences interested in watching, and what was old Hollywood afraid of?
Targets, a movie about a war inside a man's head.
Hey, what are you doing?
Even though Targets is more thriller than horror, that doesn't necessarily mean it isn't horrific. I mean, there's so many layers to this film that it's easily one of the most meta movies of the 60s. In fact, it was so relevant to 1968 that it was actually a box office flop. I imagine this was a beacon of hope for old Hollywood executives who wanted Psycho and its many ripoffs to remain the standard for horror, but the film failed at the box office not just because of the Hays Codes. It failed because it was released the same year Martin Luther King Jr. and Bobby Kennedy were assassinated, and Targets is directly inspired by the Texas University Tower killer Charles Whitman. So, yeah, you have a movie that's essentially about a mass shooter coming out in a year when America was already reeling from real-life tragedies. I mean, talk about impeccable timing. So I don't blame the country for not wanting to see a movie about a psycho killer shooting people through a drive-in theater screen. It didn't really click for me until I watched Peter Bogdanovich's commentary. But Targets has this sort of dreamlike quality to it, largely thanks to production designer Polly Platt, who is Peter's wife at the time. And especially in Tim O'Kelly's scenes, everything is washed in these icy blues. His house is super bland and empty, with just enough decor to feel like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. And there's this strange, ethereal, almost metropolis-like quality, as if Fritz Lang had influenced the cinematography. And it's done to such a degree that when Tim starts killing, you almost don't believe it's happening. It's almost as if Bogdanovich has hypnotized the audience into seeing the world through a psycho killer's eyes. Now, some critics claim that Targets is anti-gun, but I think that misrepresents Bogdanovich's intentions. I don't think he made Targets as this sort of outcry against gun ownership. I think the film is a product of the Vietnam War. which makes it more anti-system rather than explicitly anti-gun. And even in his commentary, Peter mentions that he had hoped targets would highlight how dangerously easy it was to buy a gun in the 60s. I mean, Tim O'Kelly's character walks into 2 different gun stores at 2 different points in the film and loads up like a kid in a candy shop. I think actually in one scene, he's literally eating a candy bar while purchasing firearms with his dad's money, by the way. To say Targets is strictly anti-gun, I think misses the mark. No pun intended. It would be like saying Top Gun is anti-masculinity because it exploits toxic masculinity. I think Targets argues that the young men who returned from Vietnam, the sort of offspring of the good old boys, returning in body but not necessarily in mind, those guys should have received more attention and care, and that people in general shouldn't be able to buy guns so easily. I think that's what Peter's trying to say.
Peter Bogdanovich, the director of The Last Picture Show, takes you for a roller coaster ride through the canyons of a disturbed mind in Targets.
The light! Stay in there, get down! Oh, there's somebody shooting out here! Open the window!
Boris Karloff is essentially playing a version of himself. He's this aging horror star whose career thrived under the Hays Code, but is now fading in the face of a new era. And his character basically realizes far too late that audiences just no longer want monster movies. They want the monster to be them, right? They want the slasher blood-soaked psycho killers that up until they start killing people look like everybody else. The sort of Travis Bickle type of character. In contrast, Tim O'Kelly's Bobby Thomas represents the new violent Hollywood, the thing that everybody's craving for. And ironically, he looks like your typical good old boy from old Hollywood. I mean, he looks like a perfect match between Ron Howard and Ryan O'Neal from Barry Lyndon. And he's such a good cast. Oh my gosh, he's so good. I mean, what's crazy to me is that O'Kelly only acted in 2 more films before disappearing from the industry. His performance is so chilling. I mean, his smile right when he first shows up, and I mean, this sort of crooked smile, like he's hiding his psychotic edge, this sort of rolling thunder, taxi driver, deer hunter type of character. I mean, he absolutely knocks it out of the park. Bogdanovich makes a bold choice by having Karloff's character essentially be the hero, responsible for Bobby Thompson's arrest. And in the climax, Boris's character is walking towards Bobby, dressed like a Victorian-era gentleman, while the movie theater screen at the drive-in, Boris has one of his movies premiering. And so Boris, on the movie screen, is sort of this monstrous visage looming over the scene, and he's walking towards the camera. And at the same time, Boris, the actor in person, is approaching Bobby, the psycho killer. And Bobby's crouched behind this storage unit, and he's dressed in all white and these grass-stained Converse. Like you almost get the feeling they're trying to depict him as this weaker angel of death, while meanwhile he's seen 2 Boris Karloffs lurking toward him. And he basically freezes, and I don't blame him. I mean, 1 Boris Karloff lurking towards you is frightening enough, let alone 2. And so Bobby gets arrested, and during that moment, Boris delivers this line quite elegantly, and he says the line, "So that's what I was afraid of." And what a line to sort of capture everything that had been going on throughout that film, and everything that had been going on in the 60s, and everything that had been going on in Hollywood. It's this sort of Russian doll one-liner that captures everything that was happening at that time. It's so layered. It's old Hollywood versus new Hollywood. It's classic horror versus modern horror. It's Boris Karloff versus a new kind of monster.
Roll your window down! There's a sniper in here!
There's someone going up there.
What turns an all-American boy into an all-American killer?